Hey guys, I hope you're all well. This video is a little late coming. I'm going to talk about the top books I read in the month of April. I read 12 books last month, and like in the month of March, I'm going to talk about the ones that stood out to me the most. First, we have Heartless by Marissa Meyer. You may know her as the author of the excellent Lunar Chronicles, which are basically classic fairy tales but set in the future. Heartless is essentially Alice in Wonderland fanfiction. It's the Queen of Hearts origin story. Her given name is Catherine, and her dream is to bake and sell confections. But she has a mother who is literally worse than Mrs. Bennet. She intends for Catherine to marry the King of Hearts, who is, in short, a man-child. Kath also ends up falling for the court jester, who's this mysterious and charismatic persona. Now, Marissa Meyer does the evolution of the villain really well. She did that a bit for Lunar Chronicles. You kind of see in Kath's journey that no one really sets out to be a monster. They're more products of circumstance and fate. The ending, as you can guess, is really sad but also kind of perfect. Also, Marissa Meyer's writing has improved by leaps and bounds. I mean, I love the Lunar Chronicles, but the first couple books didn't have the best writing. But then I read Heartless and I was like, oh my god, this is really good writing. So you may know from my last video that I did Tome Topple Readathon last month, and I managed to read 3 books. First, I read Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. A lot of people accuse this of ripping off Harry Potter, but to me it's more of a response. It has similar elements like a magic school and a so-called chosen one, but Rainbow Rowell creates this really clever and quirky magic system. Basically, spells are idioms and phrases that have significant linguistic relevance, and they lose their power over time if they go out of use. She also subverts the trope of the mentor figure that Dumbledore represents in Harry Potter in a really unexpected way. And of course, I came for the LGBT romance and it delivered. Baz and Simon have such a charming dynamic. If you want to read any LGBT romance, this is the one I recommend. And then I read Gemina, which messed me up. This was the second in the Illuminae Files series, and it deals with a deadly invasion, but this time on a space station. All I'm gonna say is that I'm not gonna look at worms with teeth the same way again. If you're into sci-fi at all, you have to read this series. Now we come to Mistborn, The Final Empire, which is the first in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. It takes place in a dystopic future where the weather sucks. Earth has essentially become an ashy landscape. There's a form of magic called allomancy where users consume different metals and harness powers from them. And our main character is Vin. She is a street urchin who can use all of the allomantic metals, and she's taken in by this organization that's trying to take down this disturbingly feudal government that's been put in place. What I really appreciated about this book is that it delves into the intense logistical complications that go into organizing a rebellion, because without that, your revolution holds no water. I also really enjoyed the My Fair Lady transformation that Vin goes through, but she goes through that without losing her old instincts that have allowed her to survive. So I'm definitely looking forward to reading the next book. So I started The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss during TTR, but I finished it after that readathon ended. This is considered a fantasy classic. It concerns itself with a magician called Kvothe, who is somewhat of a legendary figure, but he's in some sort of witness protection. He's posing as an innkeeper in some obscure town, but he meets this character called the Chronicler who recognizes him and really wants to record his story. So most of this book is a story within a story, kind of like Frankenstein. As much as this was a fantasy novel, I read it as more of a survival story and a Bildungsroman, and when you read it like that, it's very moving. My one quibble was that a lot of the women in the stories just seem so perfect. Then I was like, well, he's a teenager in most of his narratives, so I guess that works. Now let's get to one of my favorite writers, David Sedaris. I read Let's Explore Diabetes with Owls, and as with all of his work, it was hilarious. David Sedaris writes the funniest essays, but he's also so insightful. Sometimes you look at something differently after reading his work, like language and healthcare. If you ever want to read David Sedaris, I highly recommend listening to him on audiobook because he reads his own work and he always does it perfectly. And finally, Outlander. This was very enjoyable but also very dense. It took me about 2 weeks to read. If you're not familiar with this series or the show, it's about a World War II nurse called Claire who's vacationing in the Scottish Highlands with her husband, and she is transported back to the 1740s right on the cusp of the Jacobite Rebellion. It was this failed attempt to put the Stuart dynasty back on the British throne and displace King George II. So Claire is dropped in on around this turbulent political atmosphere. She gets entangled in the lives of different people she encounters, and she develops a romance with Jamie Fraser, one of the Scotsmen she meets, thereby forming one of my favorite OTPs of like ever. This really hit me in the historical fiction spot. So if you have such a spot, I highly recommend this. So those are my top April reads. Of course, I didn't mention all of the books I read in April. If you want to know my thoughts on the other books I didn't mention in this video, I will link my Goodreads page below. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I will see you again soon.